vast domed ceiling of the Galactic Academy's survival training complex shimmered with a simulated twilight, casting a deep purple hue over the assembled students. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and alien foliage. The ground beneath their feet an uneven mixture of moss-covered stone and patches of soft, humid soil. Overhead, glowing orbs floated lazily, mimicking the natural bioluminescence of the moon's I-47, where their next test was designed to take place. Professor Xylar stood before the class, his four luminous eyes scanning the group with his usual unreadable expression. His elongated frame, draped in a ceremonial teaching robe that shimmered with shifting colors, was as still as a statue. Only the slow undulation of his secondary arms betrayed the excitement he likely felt. He was one of the most respected scholars in galactic survival sciences, having trained some of the best navigators, explorers, and strategists across known space. His methods were harsh but effective, and every student in his class knew that failure was not an option. "Today's challenge," he announced in a deep, layered voice that resonated unnaturally, "will test your ability to construct a viable means of transportation using only the resources available to you. You will be placed on the banks of the Eldori Swamp, a volatile and shifting body of water known for its toxic currents, unstable terrain, and unpredictable wildlife. Your objective is simple: cross to the other side by sunrise. No advanced technology, no outside assistance." A murmur rippled through the gathered students. The Eldori Swamp was infamous among survivalists. Its waters contained acidic pockets that could dissolve organic matter within minutes. Its dense fog was thick with spores that caused disorientation and hallucinations, and the creatures that lurked beneath its surface were opportunistic predators that rarely missed a chance to attack something that drifted too far from shore. Liam Palmer stood at the back of the group, arms crossed, observing the reactions of his fellow students. He had grown accustomed to the way aliens perceived humans. Some with fascination, others with skepticism, and a few with outright disdain. He had spent the last year proving himself at the academy, enduring stares, whispered bets on his survival odds, and endless discussions about how humans, a species from an underdeveloped death world, had managed to secure a place in the prestigious program. He had never bothered correcting their misconceptions. He preferred actions over words. Next to him, Drevkor, a towering reptilian with deep emerald scales, let out a slow exhale through his nostrils. His kind, the Gralzek, were renowned for their brute strength and endurance. Drevkor muttered, arms flexing as he studied the floating hologram of the swamp projected in front of the class. "Water's dense. Heavy objects will sink fast. We need a structure that can distribute weight evenly," a sharp, clipped voice responded before Liam could even think of a reply. She-Kala, an avian-like humanoid with iridescent blue feathers, scoffed. "Strength alone won't help you, lizard. You'll need balance. Wind currents are unpredictable in that region. Any poorly built raft will capsize within minutes." Her piercing yellow eyes flicked toward Liam with something between amusement and challenge. "And what about you, Death Worlder? Humans like to boast about their ingenuity. Let's see if you can actually deliver." Liam smirked but said nothing. Instead, he glanced up at the professor, waiting for further instruction. Xylar's gaze lingered on him for a fraction of a second longer than the others before he raised one of his many hands. "Prepare for transport." In an instant, the simulated training grounds dissolved, replaced by the humid, suffocating air of Xi-47's swampland. The students materialized along the muddy shoreline, their boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. The Eldori Swamp stretched before them like a vast, uninviting abyss, the water an eerie shade of dark green, shifting sluggishly as unseen creatures stirred beneath the surface. Liam inhaled deeply. The air was thick with moisture and carried an underlying metallic tang. High sulfur concentration, he noted. That meant there could be thermal vents nearby. Useful if one knew how to take advantage of them. He ignored the uneasy whispers among the students as they examined their surroundings. Some had already begun assessing potential materials, tree bark, vines, fallen branches. But he had learned early on that survival wasn't about speed. It was about understanding the environment before acting. Drevkor immediately stomped into the underbrush, searching for sturdy logs, muttering calculations about weight distribution under his breath. She-Kala climbed into the lower branches of a twisted, gnarled tree, plucking long strands of flexible fibers and inspecting them with sharp, calculated movements. Further down the shore, a Voral student attempted to slice a thick sheet of swamp moss with her retractable claws, testing its durability. Liam took a different approach. He knelt by the water's edge and ran his fingers through the mud, noting its consistency. Thick, viscous, high in organic compounds, possibly good for waterproofing if dried properly. He picked up a chunk of resin-coated driftwood, examined its density, and nodded slightly to himself. This could work. His eyes swept across the landscape, taking in the positioning of trees, the wind's direction, and the subtle movement of water. He spotted what he was looking for, a cluster of hollow, lightweight reeds growing near the base of a rock formation. Perfect. The other students were too busy with their own plans to notice Liam began collecting his materials. He moved efficiently, hands deftly stripping bark, securing vines, and gathering resin. He didn't waste time theorizing. He already knew what he needed to do. Meanwhile, the others struggled. Drevkor's massive logs were too heavy to float properly. Shikolah's woven platform crumbled under its own weight. The Voral's moss raft absorbed too much water and started sinking the moment she stepped on it. Frustration mounted, voices grew sharper, and occasional insults were exchanged. Liam remained silent. He had no interest in debates. He had a boat to build. The night deepened over the Eldori swamp, its surface shifting under the eerie glow of bioluminescent fungi clinging to the twisted trees. A dense mist rolled in from the far side of the water, curling around the students like a living thing, dampening sound and obscuring their surroundings. The air was thick with the scent of decay and moisture, carrying faint traces of sulfur and something faintly metallic. The oppressive humidity clung to everything, making movement sluggish and draining energy with every passing hour. Drevkor let out a low growl as he wrestled with another heavy log, his scaled arm straining against the weight. His brute strength allowed him to haul the massive chunk of wood into place, but it refused to stay balanced. No matter how he positioned it, the structure remained unstable, tipping awkwardly to one side. He muttered under his breath, tail twitching in agitation. Every attempt to lash the logs together with vines only made things worse. The material, though flexible, lacked the necessary grip, slipping against the damp wood and unraveling with the slightest shift in pressure. Shikala perched atop a thick, gnarled branch, her sharp eyes scanning the water for patterns in the movement of the current. She had abandoned her earlier attempt at weaving a flat platform, recognizing the structural weakness in time, and instead focused on constructing a lighter, more aerodynamic frame. Her nimble fingers worked quickly, threading together strands of dried plant fiber with practiced precision, forming a skeletal framework, reinforced with hardened resin. Unlike Drevkor, she prioritized agility over durability, aiming for something light enough to stay afloat, yet flexible enough to adjust to the water's motion. A few paces away, Voral crouched low to the ground, her elongated fingers deftly slicing through thick layers of swamp moss. Her species relied on chemical reactions more than brute force or engineering, and she was attempting to create a bioreactive flotation layer. By compressing the organic material and triggering a natural hardening process, she hoped to form a rigid, buoyant surface. The problem was stability. Every segment she tested warped under its own weight, cracking unpredictably or absorbing too much moisture. With each failure, her frustration grew, her iridescent skin pulsing in agitation. Liam barely registered their struggles as he worked. He had already gathered most of what he needed and was now focusing on assembly. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, securing each component with a level of precision that came from years of experience. Every decision was made with purpose. The placement of the flotation supports, the distribution of weight, the careful reinforcement of the joints. Unlike the others who were trying to construct rafts from single-layer designs, Liam had built a frame first, ensuring that the structure would hold together before adding the buoyant elements. His choice of materials set his work apart. The hollow reeds he had collected earlier formed the base of his flotation system, arranged in tight bundles and lashed together with dried plant fibers reinforced with natural resin. The framework was reinforced with lightweight wood, selected specifically for its resistance to water absorption, while the joints were sealed with a paste-like substance he had crafted from mud and crushed mineral deposits. Every part served a function. Nothing was wasted, nothing was left to chance. Time passed unnoticed as he worked, his focus unbroken by the sounds of frustration coming from the others. When he finally stepped back, inspecting his progress, he felt a rare sense of satisfaction. The skeletal hull of his boat was already recognizable, its shape designed for stability rather than simple flotation. He had constructed outriggers, secondary supports that would help balance the craft even in rough water, a design choice none of the others had considered. Drevkor, exhausted from his repeated failures, finally turned his attention toward Liam's progress. His golden eyes narrowed as he studied the structure, his frustration momentarily forgotten. "What are you building?" His deep voice rumbled in the still night air. Liam didn't look up. "A boat," Drevkor scoffed. The task was to build a raft. Liam smirked slightly, tightening a knot. A raft is just a platform that floats. A boat is a raft that actually works. Shakala, having overheard, hopped down from her perch and strode over, arms crossed. Her keen eyes flicked over the unorthodox design, noting the level of detail with grudging respect. "You've done this before," she said, more statement than question. Liam shrugged, adjusting one of the support beams. "Something like it?" Vorel approached next, her curiosity outweighing her earlier frustration. She studied the way he had arranged the flotation devices, her fingers tracing the resin-coated joints. "Your method of waterproofing is effective," she admitted, her usually melodic voice edged with hesitation. "Primitive, but efficient." Liam continued working, unfazed by their scrutiny. He had expected this reaction, skepticism followed by reluctant interest. He had seen it in every other survival challenge the Academy had thrown at him. The aliens in his class were brilliant theorists, but few had ever needed to rely on their own resourcefulness. He had no doubt that they were capable of adaptation, but they lacked the experience that came from a species raised in an environment where survival wasn't guaranteed. Drevkor grunted, rubbing his chin. "I still think my approach is better," he muttered, though the lack of conviction in his tone was telling. Shikala tilted her head, feathers rustling as she glanced at him. "Your approach is failing." Drevkor scowled but didn't argue. Liam finished tightening the last lashings, then stood, wiping his hands on his pant leg. "You can keep trying to make your rafts work," he said evenly. "Or you can pay attention and learn something." The others exchanged looks, their pride warred with their practicality. Shikala was the first to concede. "Show me how you balance the supports," she said, stepping forward. Vorel followed next, her sharp eyes already analyzing his work. Drevkor hesitated the longest, but eventually, with a low sigh, he stomped forward, arms crossed. "Fine," he muttered, "but if we're doing this, we're making it bigger. No way I'm squeezing onto that thing like a hatchling." Liam smirked. "Then grab some more reeds, we have work to do." The night stretched on as the unlikely group worked together, the swamp's eerie silence broken only by the rustle of reeds, the scrape of wood, and the occasional muttered curse. The others might have resisted at first, but Liam knew the truth. The moment they saw something that worked, they would abandon their failing ideas without hesitation. By the time the first hints of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the structure was twice the size of Liam's original design, reinforced with additional supports and customized to accommodate multiple passengers. It was no longer just a boat. It was the only thing that would get them across the Eldori swamp alive. A faint glow stretched across the horizon as the first signs of dawn illuminated the mist-covered Eldori swamp. The sky remained a deep, bruised shade of purple, the air thick with moisture and the scent of stagnant water. The boat stood finished, its structure reinforced with additional supports and modifications designed to accommodate multiple passengers. Liam tightened the last of the lashings, his fingers moving with efficiency despite the exhaustion creeping into his limbs. He had spent hours securing every joint, ensuring that no weak points remained. Shikala stood nearby, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. Her feathers were damp from the humid air, their iridescent sheen dulled by the long night of work. She flexed her claws, restless. "The water's too still," she muttered. "Something's wrong." Drevkor grunted as he tested the stability of the boat, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His massive frame caused the structure to creak, but it held firm. "You're always expecting trouble," he muttered, adjusting the strap of his equipment harness. "Maybe, for once, things are just going smoothly." Vorel crouched at the edge of the boat, dipping her elongated fingers into the murky water. She lifted her hand and watched the thick droplets slide off her iridescent skin. "No," she murmured. "She's right. Something's changed." Liam glanced up, narrowing his eyes. He hadn't noticed it before, too focused on the finishing touches of their work, but now it was obvious. The swamp had grown unnaturally quiet. The constant drone of nocturnal insects had faded. The distant croaks and growls of unseen creatures had vanished. Even the wind had died, leaving only the muffled lapping of water against the shore. He scanned the tree line, noting the way the shadows stretched unnaturally long. The fog had thickened, clinging low to the ground, curling around the twisted roots of the trees like a living thing. His instincts prickled, an old survival reflex kicking in. Environments didn't shift this suddenly without reason. Shikala clicked her beak, shifting her stance. "We need to move, now." Drevkor frowned, but Liam was already pushing the boat toward the water. "Get in," he said. Vorel hesitated. What if a deep, resonant ripple vibrated through the swamp, originating from somewhere beneath the surface? The water, which had been eerily still just moments before, suddenly shifted, not in waves, but in slow, deliberate pulses, as if something massive was moving beneath it. Drevkor's tail snapped to attention. "That's not natural." Liam didn't waste time arguing. He grabbed the nearest vine they had used for securing supplies and threw it into the boat. "Everyone in, now!" Shikala leapt first, her movements swift and controlled. Vorel followed, her hesitation gone. Drevkor took longer, his bulk making the process awkward, but he managed to haul himself inside. Liam jumped in last, grabbing the makeshift paddle he had crafted from a wide, flat plank. The boat drifted free from the shore just as the first shadow broke the surface. It was barely visible beneath the dark water, but Liam caught the shape. Long, serpentine, and moving with the slow precision of a predator that knew it was unseen. The creature didn't disturb the surface so much as slide through it, leaving only the faintest impression of movement. But it was there, and it was circling. Shikala had already drawn a short blade from her belt, her wings flaring slightly in agitation. "Tell me we're not dealing with a swamp feeder." Vorel's normally calm expression tightened. "No." Liam gritted his teeth, forcing the paddle through the water with measured strokes. Speed was secondary to control. If they moved erratically, they'd draw attention. His mind raced through the possibilities. Zephyr 7's ecosystem was dense with aquatic predators, but few were bold enough to attack a moving vessel, unless they were territorial. Drevkor peered into the water, his ridged brow furrowing. "We need a plan." Another ripple spread across the swamp, closer this time. Liam exhaled slowly. "Yeah, we do." Shikala adjusted her grip on the blade. "Then let's hear it before that thing decides we're food." Liam kept his strokes steady. "It's not hunting us. Not yet. It's assessing whether we're a threat or an easy target." Drevkor's claws flexed against the wooden edge of the boat. "And what happens when it makes that decision?" The boat lurched slightly as something bumped it from below. The impact wasn't enough to throw them off balance, but it was a warning, a test. Vorel's voice was eerily calm. "Then we'll know." Liam adjusted his grip on the paddle. "We don't let it decide." Drevkor narrowed his eyes. "You have an idea?" Liam nodded. "Yeah, but you're not going to like it." Shikala let out a sharp breath. "Try us." The boat trembled again as the creature's shadow passed just beneath the surface, circling closer. Liam set his jaw. "We provoke it first." A silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the faint, rhythmic sloshing of water against the hull. Drevkor's tail flicked. "Explain." Liam's grip tightened on the paddle. "Right now, it's testing us, trying to figure out if we're prey. If we keep moving like we're afraid, it'll make its choice soon enough." He met their gazes. "But if we act like predators first, we change the dynamic." Shikala's feathers bristled. "You want to threaten something that's larger than our entire boat?" Liam shrugged. "Worked for our ancestors." Drevkor exhaled, considering. "What do you need us to do?" Liam glanced at Vorel. "You still have that mineral paste?" She nodded. "Why?" "Because we're going to make a distraction." Another bump from below, stronger this time. The creature was getting impatient. Liam's heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. "We coat the water with it. The chemical reaction should create enough of a sensory overload to confuse it for a few moments." Vorel nodded and reached into the supply pack, retrieving a handful of the paste she had crafted earlier. Shikala shifted position. "And after that?" Liam dipped the paddle into the water, adjusting their trajectory. "Then we see if it scares as easily as it hunts." Drevkor cracked his knuckles. "Or we find out just how fast this thing can move." The water beneath them churned as something massive rose from the depths. And then, all at once, the plan was set into motion. The swamp exploded in movement as the water beneath the boat churned violently. A massive shadow surged upward, the surface splitting apart as the creature made its presence fully known. A thick, sinuous body, nearly the length of their entire vessel, rippled beneath the murky depths. Its scales glistened in the dim light, a sickly green that shimmered as it shifted. Twin ridges ran along its spine, rising above the water like jagged, living rock formations. Liam's muscles tensed as the first wave of displaced water slammed into the boat, tilting it sharply to one side. He braced his stance, gripping the paddle tightly to keep balance. Shikala dug her claws into the wooden frame, her wings flaring slightly for counterbalance. Drevkor crouched low, his powerful tail lashing against the floorboards for stability. Vorel, though shaken, remained eerily calm, her elongated fingers already working the mineral paste into a thick, malleable mass. The creature did not attack immediately. Instead, it lingered just beneath the surface, circling, its ridges slicing through the water in slow, deliberate arcs. It was still deciding, testing. Liam exhaled slowly. Now, Vorel didn't hesitate. She flung a handful of the paste into the water, the pale substance dispersing in thick clouds. The chemical reaction was immediate. Thin tendrils of vapor curled upward, a reaction caused by the swamp's unique mineral composition meeting the foreign compound. The scent was sharp, almost metallic, and carried a subtle electrical charge, sending faint ripples through the air. For a moment, the creature hesitated. Its massive bulk lurched to one side, ridges twitching in agitation as the new stimulus disrupted its sensory perception. The water around it bubbled slightly, as if reacting to the unseen chemical interaction. Shikala's sharp eyes flicked toward Liam. It's confused, but not for long. Liam had already moved to the next step. He struck the surface of the water with his paddle, hard. The sound echoed unnaturally in the dense atmosphere, cutting through the thick air like a gunshot. He struck again, another sharp, percussive impact. Predators reacted to rhythm, sound, aggression. Drevkor caught on immediately. He slammed his massive fist against the wooden hull, sending vibrations through the structure. Shikala followed suit, clicking her beak rapidly, creating a series of sharp, deliberate sounds. The pattern was unmistakable. A territorial challenge. The creature twisted suddenly, its ridges rising higher as it reevaluated the situation. The disturbance in the water, the chemical anomaly, the rhythmic signals of challenge, they all collided in its primitive brain. Varl's voice was barely a whisper. It's deciding whether we are predators or prey. Liam's grip on the paddle tightened. And then, we don't give it time to choose. The boat lurched forward as he drove the paddle into the water, pushing them toward the opposite shore with all the force he could muster. The others followed his lead without hesitation. Drevkor shifted his weight, adding his sheer brute strength to the movement. Shikala positioned herself at the rear, her wings outstretched slightly to adjust their balance. Vorel crouched low, monitoring the creature's movements with laser focus. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then the water erupted. The creature surged upward, its ridged spine breaking through the surface in a violent arc. Its head remained obscured beneath the murky depths, but its sheer size was undeniable. A wall of displaced swamp water crashed toward them, surging in a powerful wave. Liam twisted his body at the last second, angling the boat into the wave rather than away from it. The design held, barely. The outrigger supports took the brunt of the force, preventing a full capsize, but the impact threw Vorel off balance. She slipped, her elongated limbs flailing for a grip. Shikala lunged, catching Vorel's wrist before she could topple into the water. Her grip was ironclad, her feathers slick with moisture as she pulled Vorel back into the boat with a sharp motion. Drevkor bared his fangs. "Move faster!" Liam didn't need to be told twice. He drove the paddle into the water again, the muscles in his arms burning from the exertion. The boat gained speed, cutting through the swamp at an angle that maximized their momentum. The creature lunged once more, but this time it did not attack outright. Instead, it reared back, its ridges twitching as if overwhelmed by conflicting instincts. The chemical reaction still lingered in the air, the unnatural vapor clinging to the surface. The rhythmic challenge sounds had thrown off its usual predatory sequence. It was uncertain, hesitating. Shikala exhaled sharply. "It's waiting for us to make a mistake." Liam's jaw clenched. Then we don't. The shoreline was close now, the dense underbrush of the far bank rising in jagged, tangled shapes. If they could reach it, they'd have cover, an obstacle the creature might not want to navigate. Drevkor's voice was a low growl. Final push. Liam's arms screamed in protest as he forced the paddle through the water with every ounce of strength he had left. Shikala used her wings in short, controlled bursts, creating minor updrafts to counteract the swamp's natural drag. Vorel threw the last of the mineral paste behind them, further clouding the water with its disorienting effect. The creature hesitated once more. That was all they needed. The boat hit the shallows with a lurch, skimming over the thick roots that lined the swamp's edge. The impact nearly sent them tumbling, but momentum carried them forward, pushing them onto solid ground. Liam didn't stop to breathe. He jumped out first, grabbing the front of the boat and hauling it further inland before the current could drag them back. Drevkor was right behind him, using his superior strength to wrench the vessel onto the muddy shore. Chikala and Viril scrambled out next, both keeping their gazes locked on the water. For several agonizing seconds, nothing moved. Then the creature shifted back into the depths, disappearing beneath the surface with one final, lingering ripple. It did not pursue. Varl exhaled, her normally composed features betraying a flicker of relief. It let us go. Drevkor shook his head. No. It let us win. Chikala straightened, rolling her shoulders. There's a difference? Liam glanced at the dark, roiling water one last time. Yeah, he murmured. There is. The swamp was silent once more, but this time it was the silence of a predator recognizing another. The boat lay half buried in the thick, tangled roots of the swamp's far shore. Its frame, though battered, remained intact, a testament to the design and the sheer will of those who had built it. The air was heavy with the scent of damp vegetation, the ground beneath their feet slick with mud and decaying plant matter. Liam took a slow breath, his arms aching from the exertion, his fingers still locked in a tight grip on the edge of the boat. Drevkor straightened first, his massive frame rolling back his shoulders with a deep, steadying inhale. His golden eyes flicked toward the water's edge, watching the dark surface as if expecting the creature to return. It didn't. The swamp remained undisturbed, the final ripples fading into the unnatural stillness that had settled over the landscape. Chikala flicked moisture from her feathers, her gaze darting between the others. She did not speak immediately, her breathing measured, her wings held slightly away from her body in a habitual stance of readiness. She was still on edge, but her posture relaxed by a fraction as the reality of the moment settled in. Vorel knelt beside the boat, her elongated fingers tracing the deep scratches gouged into the frame. The damage was not enough to compromise the structure, but it was evident. If it had committed to the attack, she murmured, we wouldn't have made it. Liam exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face, his exhaustion catching up with him. But it didn't. Drevkor let out a low rumble, something between a sigh and a grunt of acknowledgement. Because we didn't act like prey. Chikala's feathers rustled as she tilted her head. So what does that make us? Liam smirked faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Something it didn't want to fight. The words hung in the air between them, unspoken truths settling into place. The swamp had tested them, just as Professor Xylar had intended. But the challenge had not simply been about constructing a vessel to cross the water. It had been about understanding what survival truly meant. It wasn't about strength alone, nor intelligence in isolation. It was about adaptability, about knowing when to push forward and when to hold ground. Voyle stood, brushing damp earth from her hands. We should move before the sun rises fully. Drevkor nodded, stepping back from the boat, his tail dragging slightly through the mud. Agreed. The professor is waiting. Liam rolled his shoulders, glancing once more toward the water before turning toward the dense underbrush that stretched ahead of them. The far side of the swamp was no less treacherous than the water itself. Tangled vegetation, unstable ground, and unseen dangers lurked in every shadow. But it was different from where they had come. It was new terrain, and the only way forward was through it. Chikala took the lead, her avian instincts attuned to movement, her keen eyesight cutting through the shifting light of dawn. Vorel followed closely, her movements fluid and deliberate, cataloging the unfamiliar plant life as she moved. Drevkor fell into step beside Liam, his heavy footfalls making little sound against the damp ground. The path was not easy. The terrain fought them at every turn. Thick vines tangled at their feet, Thorned branches caught at their clothing, and hidden pockets of unstable ground threatened to swallow their steps. But they moved with purpose, no longer individuals following their own instincts, but a group that had proven its ability to adapt and survive together. The distant shimmer of the Galactic Academy's observation tower came into view as the first true light of morning broke through the canopy. It stood tall against the hazy skyline, its metallic surface reflecting the colors of the rising sun. It was a stark contrast to the organic chaos of the swamp, a symbol of the controlled environment they had left behind. As they stepped into the clearing at the base of the tower, the familiar figure of Professor Xylar awaited them. His 4 luminous eyes regarded them with an unreadable expression, his elongated frame still and composed. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he let his gaze travel over each of them in turn, noting the mud-streaked uniforms, the exhausted but alert stances, the lingering tension of those who had faced something unknown and emerged on the other side. Finally, he inclined his head. "You have completed the trial." Shakala's feathers bristled slightly, her stance shifting. "That's all you have to say?" Exelar's secondary arms folded across his chest, the gesture deliberate. "Your survival is acknowledgement enough. The challenge was never about simply reaching the far shore." His gaze lingered on Liam for a fraction of a second longer. It was about understanding how to face what lies beyond it. Beaurard straightened, her iridescent skin shifting in the light. "And what lies beyond?" Xylar's many eyes gleamed. "That is what you must continue to discover." The weight of the words settled over them. Not an end, but a beginning. Drevkor exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders. "If you want to tell us we passed, just say it." Xylar's expression did not shift, but there was the faintest trace of something akin to amusement in his tone. "You passed." Shakala let out a sharp, clipped sound. Whether it was a laugh or simply an exhale of relief was unclear. Vorel simply nodded, satisfied with the answer. Liam allowed himself a moment to breathe, to let the exhaustion fade into something else. Accomplishment. The swamp had tested them, and they had endured. Not just as individuals, but as a team. As the rising sun cast its golden light over the Academy's grounds, the 4 of them stepped forward, leaving the shadows of the swamp behind. They had proven themselves, and the galaxy was waiting.